Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, a visionary and messenger of arcane mysteries, had already warned the world about the illusion surrounding material existence and the profound ignorance that pervades modern humanity concerning its own nature. In her view, what we call the I, that personality made up of a name, individual history, and memories, is nothing more than a shadow projected by a lower stage of consciousness, a deception operating under the veil of Maya, the cosmic veil of illusion. This great sage claimed that the human being is not the body it inhabits, nor the thoughts that form and dissolve, nor even the memory accumulated over a lifetime. We are an inextinguishable flame of the Logos, a living and eternal portion of the universal soul, immortal and without beginning or end, observing worldly phenomena from an invisible plane. For Blavatsky, identity is nothing but an imposed storyline, a disguise handed to us at birth, which we assume unquestioningly. We carry a script not written by the greater will, but by the karmic conditions of our incarnation. From the very first moment of life, human consciousness is shaped by external forces. We receive a name, a language, a way of thinking, and a list of fears, prejudices, beliefs, and modes of behavior that make us believe all of this is our essence. However, behind the theater remains a silent observer, the light that sees all masks and roles but is not confused with them. If we are brave enough to look beyond the mirror reflecting a body subject to continuous transformations, we will make a profound discovery. The question, "Who am I?" has no fixed answer. The true I is not contained in concepts, is not limited by language, nor is it confused with form. Blavatsky recognized reality as something that does not pre-exist observation, but rather is continuously co-created by the observer. In more modern terms, the act of perceiving collapses probabilities into concrete facts. Therefore, the observer and the observed are two faces of the same dynamic process. In other words, we are not an ephemeral body living a finite life. We are the very presence that perceives all this. We are the eternal witness that has never been born and therefore will never die. Every time we look in the mirror, we see a shell that changes incessantly, an apparent solidity upheld by our karmic desire to be incarnated. But it is enough to ask, through whom am I seeing right now? Who is this that thinks? Where does the sense of being come from? Conventional science is only now beginning to approach these questions, but occult science has explored them since time immemorial. For Blavatsky, the universe is not a cold, indifferent machine, but a living expression of the Logos, a pulsating and conscious intelligence that recognizes itself in each one of us. And we are not apart from this intelligence. We are its conscious particles, direct expressions that also create and transform as they observe. In the higher planes, where thought takes shape and intention molds subtle substance, there is no distinction between subject and object. There, the thinker, the thought, and the outcome form an indivisible unity. John Wheeler, a notable physicist, addressed the idea that the universe is participatory. Although coming from a different horizon, he touched on ancient occult truths. The visible world has no autonomous existence, depending entirely on the consciousness that sustains it. Thus, if what we call visible is essentially a projection, the body, those atoms and molecules in an incessant dance, is merely a transient mask, shaped by the desire and energy of the incarnated spirit. This body is neither fixed nor enduring. Each cell renews itself, dies, and is reborn. Brain connections reorganize. How then can we dare say we are this body if it never remains the same? Behind all this movement lies the constant inquirer, the presence that affirms I am even as everything changes. This I cannot be flesh, nor thought, nor names, nor beliefs, because these elements are mutable, ephemeral. Authentic esoteric seeking begins when we ask ourselves, what in me does not change? What remains whole, while time, experiences, and forms follow their course? We then arrive at the understanding that time is not that straight line running from past to future, but rather a mode of perception, From the perspective of pure consciousness, time is merely a mental projection, or rather, a phenomenon that creates the sensation of flow by jumping between frames of possible realities. Yesterday and tomorrow dissolve into an eternal now, in which all potentials exist and manifest, depending only on which angle we choose to perceive. It is in this now that you exist as consciousness, beyond the reach of any limitations imposed by circumstances. What we judge as past and what we glimpse as future are nothing but images dancing in the vast present that encompasses all. Who you were and who you will be coexist at a quantum level. They are alternating expressions of a single infinite field of possibilities. The sages of old called this field the Akasha. In it, all things and all moments are recorded. Therefore, if we were capable of closing our eyes to the external world and contemplating reality with the inner eye, we would see that the real question is not, who am I, but in what state am I existing right now? For the true I, which is not limited to a biography, is rather the stage on which the scenes unfold. And if we can consciously position ourselves on that stage, we will see that reality is like a film strip with thousands of static frames, all simultaneous, but seeming to move because we project them in chronological sequence. You, by observing, decide the frequency and the sequence. According to Blavatsky, the visible universe depends on the consciousness that observes it. Wheeler, in parallel, asserted that there is no matter lying in wait to be identified, but rather vibrating possibilities, awaiting observation so that they can become defined. This proposal breaks the notion that we are passive passengers in an indifferent cosmos. We become co-creators, and each act of observing is also an act of creative participation. If there is no objective reality separate from whoever perceives it, then each of us is shaping the world. And if every thought, emotion, belief, and intention changes our own experience, then ultimately we also influence what happens around us. However, the ego, which Blavatsky described as a distorted projection of our higher self, insists on keeping us small. It shouts that life happens to us, that the universe is chaotic, that we are hostages of an immutable story. This imposter aspect thrives on fear and a sense of separation. The world then becomes hostile as the ego sees enemies everywhere, turning our experience into a battlefield. We run from invisible threats, fight shadows, and exhaust ourselves in conflicts that often exist only on the mental stage. But the ego is not real in the ultimate sense. It is merely a mental program repeating itself. Each time we believe its messages of limitation, we reinforce a kind of hypnosis. Waking from this trance is not a simple act of will. It requires self-inquiry and a willingness to discover the truth behind the veils. The ego's most powerful illusion is that it is necessary. It passes itself off as our true center, but it is only a reflection of what the higher soul really is. Reflect. How many times have you felt out of control, aimless, as if life were conspiring against your aspirations? How many times have opportunities slipped away, doors seemed closed, and the world insisted on denying your desires? Observing carefully, you'll notice that each emotion vibrating within you generates waves that spread through the quantum web. Everything starts from the inside out. If you are in a state of fear, you tend to see threats and closed doors, even attracting circumstances that confirm that vibration. On the other hand, a peaceful heart open to flow often synchronizes harmonious events, useful encounters, and solutions that seem to appear out of nowhere. For most people, this sounds strange because we were educated to believe in a mechanical universe, governed only by matter and unbreakable laws. We ignore that matter itself is a condensation of vibrations, and that these vibrations respond to consciousness. Science is now beginning to bump into these limits, but the ancient sages always knew that you are not your body, nor your memories, nor your fears. You are, fundamentally, the consciousness that observes all these things. If we pay attention to Blavatsky's writings, we see that there is no separation between us and the cosmos. We are sparks of a living intelligence, the same that gives form to galaxies and sustains every atom in harmony. Thus, we are not subjected to a fixed fate or a set of laws that ignore us. On the contrary, we are active, though often unconscious, participants in the creative process. That is why, for Blavatsky, the body we think we inhabit, being a mask of matter, is nothing more than a momentary projection of the spiritual self, shaped by the soul's aspirations and the energy of incarnation. When we blindly believe we are this mask, we forget our source, and forgetting generates the sense of loss, limitation, fear of death, and anxiety about what supposedly lies ahead. Every particle composing the body is in reciprocal motion, dying and being reborn at every instant. The brain, considered the seat of thought, is rebuilt at a frenzied pace. How can we say we are this tangle of incessant transformations? When we stop to reflect, we realize that everything goes away, yet there is still something that remains, something that feels, that knows it exists. That something, that inner eye or consciousness, is the portion we truly are, and within it, what we call time becomes relative. Blavatsky pointed out that time, from the perspective of consciousness, is not an absolute measurement. It is a perceptual construct. The past, as we know it, is the record the mind keeps of events. The future is projection or desire, and all this happens within the great theater of the present, which extends to infinity. In Oriental teachings, time is likened to a dream fabricated by the ego, and the idea of yesterday and tomorrow is treated as a practical convenience to deal with our incarnation. Yet at a deeper level, nothing exists but the now. When we experience moments of clarity, that instant when, looking at the sunset or the stars, we feel that something greater moves within us. We perceive life differently. We are crossed by a sensation of unity, of belonging to the whole. Then, upon returning to everyday life, the usual mental noise reappears, sending us back to the idea of separation. But those cracks in the veil that we experience in moments of synchronicity are not random phenomena. They are opportunities to see that reality communicates with us, and we continuously communicate with it. When John Wheeler spoke of a participatory universe, he was pointing to this ancient secret. The universe is not static or indifferent. It is a vast network of possibilities that takes shape according to our active observation and our intimate vibration. We are not passive observers, but active creators. When we understand this, everything changes. We stop feeling like victims and start taking responsibility. And that is precisely where the ego gets frightened, because it prefers to blame the world for every misfortune, rather than face the fact that, in some way, we co-create what we experience. The unpleasant repetitions in life, difficult relationships, patterns of failure, feelings of lack, can be seen as echoes of the same vibration we insist on sustaining. Instead of admitting this and changing internally, we often blame fate or bad luck. When we open ourselves to the perspective that everything in our field of experience reflects something within us, we begin to look inside. We can then transform beliefs and cleanse negative emotions that were deeply rooted. It is the beginning of a process of liberation that step by step dissolves the illusion of limitation. There is, however, the natural fear of letting go of old paradigms because they give us a sense of stability. But remember, stability within illusion is still illusion. At this stage, many choose to continue in the same pattern because, paradoxically, it is more comfortable to keep repeating the story we already know than to venture into the unknown. Yet the soul yearns for expansion, and life continually presents invitations to change. How many times, when faced with an extreme challenge, do we end up radically changing our worldview? According to Blavatsky, our biggest mistake is to believe that the ego defines our individuality. When we accept that the ego is only a set of voices and conditionings, we can begin to disidentify from it. This process of awakening does not kill the personality, but puts it back in its proper place. It becomes an instrument of expression in the world, not the ultimate seat of who we are. Thus, the fear of losing ourselves disappears because we discover that nothing real is lost. Only what was false is lost. And that is precisely the great triumph of self-knowledge. What we genuinely are cannot be threatened, for it is timeless consciousness. It is also about understanding that the synchronicities that amaze us, when someone appears right after we think of them, or when we read something that answers our innermost questions, are not mere coincidences. It is the very fabric of the universe responding to our interior. Wheeler, when speaking of it from bit, showed that reality, at its most fundamental level, is made of decisions, of choices. Form results from the collapse of potential states, and we, with our consciousness, are involved in this process at all times. Blavatsky anticipated this understanding by saying that the world is merely a projection of subtler levels of existence, and that consciousness is the greater force sustaining the illusion of separation between observer and observed. Without consciousness, there is no collapse of probabilities. Without collapse, there is no concrete manifestation. Thus, we see the body as a transitory structure within a network that is constantly reconfiguring itself. Each bodily cell is the stage of a myriad of quantum interactions, ultimately governed by an information field that is self-fed by our observation. Someone might ask, so is the mind omnipotent? Can I simply wish for anything and see it happen in the blink of an eye? In truth, this is not about catering to the ego's whims, but aligning with the flow. The universe does not respond to personalistic demands, but to vibrational coherence. If a person's genuine emotion is fear, no matter how much they try to think positively in a superficial way, the authentic vibrations they emit will still be contracted. Reality will respond to the deep feeling, not the mind's mask. The work, therefore, is to delve within, transform beliefs and emotions at the root until the frequency changes for real. That is where many spiritual traditions include meditation, self-observation, and exercises in presence. When we learn to witness the mental whirlwind without identifying with it, we make room for higher consciousness to emerge. Mindfulness is not a luxury, it is a tuning tool. When the layers of noise subside, we discover that intuition, creativity, and the sense of unity arise naturally. Then reality starts to mirror this new foundation. This inner-to-outer shift reflects the core of the teaching. The theoretical information that we are eternal consciousness has little value if we do not put it into practice. The path is not to escape the world, but to perceive it with new eyes. Then, everyday life, once seen as tedious repetition or a stage of difficulties, becomes a sacred school. Each situation, each encounter, each challenge points to something the soul needs to see. Thus, fear, anger, sadness, and even pain cease to be enemies. They become messengers, showing where there is still an energetic knot or limiting belief. Blavatsky taught that there are no adversaries outside us. The only real obstacle is ignorance of oneself. And Wheeler, though coming from a different field, ended up corroborating the idea that we are participant observers in a universe that does not exist independently of us. From this perspective, everything we experience is a reflection of some degree of consciousness. If the reflection is uncomfortable, there is no use fighting the mirror. The sensible move is to look at the source that projects the discomfort. At this point, the question may arise, what about global catastrophes? Social injustices and suffering that seems unrelated to our individual sphere? Are they also reflections of our consciousness? The answer, although not simple, comes from the same idea of a participatory network. Collectively, we generate an energetic field that shapes our global scenario. Everything is interconnected. Therefore, the sum of individual vibrations forms the psychosphere that nourishes wars, chaos, and destruction, or conversely, harmony and cooperation. There is no exact dividing line between the personal self and the external world. What each individual feels, thinks, and does reverberates throughout the entire web. In light of this reality, personal change ceases to be a purely private act and becomes a service to the collective. And on a personal level, we remember that the physical body, although viewed as something external and tangible, is still an expression of our subtler energies. Understanding this can shed new light on health and illness. The same dynamic that adjusts our experiences out there also acts in the intimacy of cells and tissues. Unresolved emotions, resentments, guilt, and fears can crystallize in the energetic field and gradually project illnesses at the physical level. In the same way, when we expand our understanding, release forgiveness, embrace self-compassion, and dissolve self-destructive beliefs, health tends to mirror this newly acquired harmony. Therefore, there is no real division between what happens in the world's landscape and what vibrates within us. We are always co-authors, though unconscious, of what we experience. We can choose to remember this and thus begin to act as conscious agents. Or we can go on sleeping in the ego's trance, believing that fate strikes us mercilessly. Life will give us signs either way. The synchronicities, the coincidences, the hidden messages in dreams and everyday events will continue to appear, for the universe is constantly in dialogue with each of us. Blavatsky emphasized that our true nature is not something that needs to be reached or conquered. It already exists in all its fullness. What we do is remove layers of illusion that hide this nature. It is akin to cleaning a dusty mirror. The image was always there, but the dirt prevented its clarity. So it is with consciousness. We remove the dust of the ego, of social programming, of traumas, and of fixed beliefs, and little by little our inner light shines forth. When it becomes clear, the person sees themselves as part of something much greater, realizes they were never isolated or forsaken, but only believed in that separation and therefore suffered. What is popularly called awakening does not make us perfect beings without negative emotions or conflicts. It simply means we come to see those emotions in a different way. Instead of plunging into them and suffering unconsciously, we recognize them as passing waves in our field. The drama may still arise, but it does not dominate us because we understand it does not reflect our essential being. On a deeper level, we know we are not made of sadness or fear. We are the presence that welcomes, sees, feels, and releases all of this. By adopting this stance, we become lucid co-creators of reality. Wheeler and Blavatsky converge on the idea that we are not passive objects. If the fundamental matter of the universe is malleable and adjusts to the act of observing, and if there are subtle dimensions where consciousness projects forms, then each of us holds the brush and paint. The picture is being painted at every instant. Recognizing this truth, free will takes on new contours, ceasing to be an abstract theory and becoming a concrete force of transformation. Of course, changing ingrained patterns is no simple task. It requires internal vigilance, detachment, and courage to face parts of ourselves we would rather not see. But gradually, as we illuminate these shadowy areas, they become integrated, and reality, which once appeared hostile, begins to show signs of harmony. Synchronicities become more frequent. Those heaven-sent encounters start happening regularly. It is not that everything becomes a bed of roses. Challenges will continue to appear. The difference is that, with a new perspective, we no longer see challenges as insoluble problems, but as invitations to expand consciousness even further. Sometimes, a major crisis can serve as a catalyst for a leap in perception. When we lose our job, when a relationship ends, when we go through an illness, we are put in check. Either we let ourselves sink into despair, or we use the opportunity to mature. While the ego clings to suffering and cries injustice, the higher self whispers that behind every rupture lies the chance to remember our unwavering essence. It is in this kind of experience that many people report their greatest epiphanies, concluding that the collapse of an old internal system made space for something truly authentic to be born. That is why Blavatsky spoke of the true identity as prior to all definitions. There is no I confined to a name, an ID number, or childhood memories. These are superficial aspects of an incarnation, useful for social interaction but incapable of describing the being that dwells in our innermost heart. By understanding this, we stop fearing death as annihilation, since we see that birth and death are movements of form. not of the eternal content. The wave returns to the ocean, but the substance is the same, water in different appearances. The message Wheeler brings in his reflections, that the universe exists because it is observed, does not deny science but deepens it. Physical laws continue to operate, yet they are no longer separate from the observer. There is no out there, entirely independent, because everything interacts in a feedback loop. Each of us, by looking, already exerts influence. Quantum mechanics revealed this in the double-slit experiments, where particle behavior seems to change depending on whether its passage is being recorded. From the spiritual perspective, this is something expected for millennia. The world is the reflection of the gaze we cast upon it. It is fascinating to see how these viewpoints converge. Blavatsky's theosophy announced ancient truths from esoteric traditions. Wheeler, through scientific modernity, pointed to something convergent by suggesting that reality is not something finished, but an ongoing creation, supported by the act of observing and interpreting it. And when we unite these legacies, we understand that not only the macrocosm, but also our personal microcosm, our daily life, mirrors this dynamism. We could even say each choice we make, however small it may seem, opens new possible universes. So, how to live this truth in daily life? Let us start by recognizing our emotions as they guide the frequency of our inner observer. When we are in panic, we project images of scarcity, aggression, or withdrawal. Life reflects that state, bringing us tense situations. Conversely, when we nurture authentic joy and calm, we collaborate with life's beneficial flows. It does not mean everything turns rosy overnight, but it increases the probability of finding solutions, inspiring people, and synchronicities that assist us. In addition, we can begin to observe our inner voices. How many times does the ego's voice repeat that we are not good enough, that we do not deserve, that we will not succeed? Have you ever stopped to notice that perhaps these thoughts are not really yours, but inherited from family, social, or cultural conditioning? By understanding this, we start liberating the mind from harmful repetitions. The simple act of questioning the origin of a thought can break its spell. Thus, each belief that limits us can be investigated, and if it no longer makes sense, discarded or transmuted. It is also essential to understand that seeking something out there is usually a projection of what is already within. If someone longs for love, it is often because they do not recognize the love in themselves. If they desperately want approval, it is because they have not validated their own existence. When we rely on deeper principles, we stop chasing after what we essentially already possess, instead of pleading. We begin to emanate. And by emanating a certain vibration, we encounter environments and people that resonate with it. It is a natural attunement, governed by the law of correspondence. Thus, we do not need to beg for things to happen. Just be aligned, and in due time, compatible scenarios appear. At this point, it is worth remembering, this is not about denying the sensory reality, but integrating it into a broader understanding. We need to eat, sleep, work, relate, and take care of the body. The body is a vehicle, not the enemy. Taking care of it and honoring it as a temple helps keep energy flowing well. However, it is crucial not to take it as our totality. Mastery lies in balancing the recognition of our inner eternity with the demands of concrete life. Blavatsky, even in her time, warned that materialistic civilization would reach a dead end, because by denying the primacy of consciousness, it would also deny the thread that gives meaning to existence. Wheeler, in a way, showed that science without the awareness that the observer is part of the phenomenon would face insurmountable limits. Today, we live in a period of crisis of meanings. Technological advances coexist with emotional crises, anxieties, and feelings of emptiness. This happens because we have distanced ourselves from the understanding that we are sacred participants in the universe, not just lost cogs. Recovering this essential notion is both a personal and collective act of salvation. Each time we look up at the night sky and feel awe, each time we are moved by a sunset, each time we sense there is something greater, we stand on the threshold of this awakening. And often, a simple instant of wonder can do more for our evolution than an entire lifetime of repeating religious or scientific dogmas without reflection. The spark of the Logos within us recognizes beauty and feels the call to merge again with the whole. Death ceases to be feared as the end, becoming merely a transition. After all, what ends is the cycle of the body, while consciousness continues its eternal course. This realization frees humans from many emotional shackles. The fear of finiteness leads many to accumulate, to dread time, and to view others as competitors. When we realize that nothing essential is lost and that our true nature is infinite, needless competitiveness fades, compassion grows, and the search for meaning deepens. Thus, we also understand that every negative emotion, every fear and resentment, is an invitation to internal examination. We are not failing by feeling them. They arise to reveal something we have not yet assimilated. When we treat them as demons to be exorcised, we lose the chance to learn. When we receive them as teachers, albeit temporary ones, we create conditions to integrate and overcome them. The shadow is only dark in the absence of light. When illuminated, it transforms into creative power. The word enlightenment is often surrounded by mysticism and seems beyond reach. However, if we are simple about it, we will understand that to enlighten is to bring clarity, to dissolve confusion. Each step toward understanding who we are, letting go of old fears, and cultivating positive states can be seen as a ray of light shining on us. It is not necessary to change overnight, but to start, right now, with one step. Wheeler and Blavatsky would agree that the universe reacts to every step, however small. Returning to the theme of synchronicity, we find a practical tool for perceiving this dialogue with the universe. It is the apparent coincidence that, deep down, carries personal meaning. They are messages in the form of improbable events or encounters that respond to an inner state. You think of a question, and shortly after, overhear part of someone else's conversation that provides the exact answer. Or you decide to change your usual route and find something you needed. Instead of dismissing it as chance, we can make room for the language of the cosmos manifesting in every detail. The entire life becomes a dance with that greater intelligence. We observe the signs, respond with elevated intention, and notice how reality adjusts. The ego may rebel, saying, "This is fantasy, there is no real influence." But by living the experience, we find that synchronicity becomes almost routine when we are in inner harmony. Coincidences increase, apparently insoluble problems are circumvented, possibilities expand. Conversely, when we sink into prolonged states of fear, anger, or pessimism, everything seems stuck or worse, as if the universe has become opaque. It is not that the external reality has become hostile. We are simply in a vibration that blocks the flow. Thus, everyone is called to investigate their state of being. The joy we radiate does not depend on external circumstances. It arises from our intimacy with the greater being. When we sustain that independent joy, we create an effect in the world that is often called a miracle. However, the miracle would not be something supernatural, but only a demonstration that reality is alive and resonant, ready to respond to every pulse of consciousness. Such power is scary because it takes us out of our comfort zone. It is easier to believe in a closed reality where we have no responsibility at all than to recognize that we largely design the map of our lives. But acknowledging our creative capacity does not mean we can avoid all challenges. It means we can deal with them differently. There is collective karma. There are complex situations involving multiple consciousnesses. But even within such scenarios, we can make choices that alter the outcome and the quality of our experience. Ultimately, Blavatsky and Wheeler converge on the same key, the idea that the observer creates, or at the very least, strongly shapes reality. Consciousness is not a product of the brain, but the fundamental substance that gives rise to all we call matter. And if we are consciousness, this implies we have access, albeit partially, to a continuous creative force. Hence the urgency of emerging from torpor and assuming our divine condition, not in a sense of arrogance, but of integration. God, or the logos or the source is not out there. It vibrates within us, for we are expressions of that same origin. If you felt dizzy absorbing these ideas, know you are not alone. Every great truth shakes our foundations. However, there is something in you that recognizes the resonance of this call. Perhaps it is the same flame that seeks to free itself from the chains of the ego, the same spark that has been yearning for answers since childhood, or that grew restless at the barrenness of a purely materialistic world. Now, it finds echoes in these words, for they point to what your heart already intuited. This is the moment to accept the invitation and delve into practicing this new perception. The final tip to experience it is simple. Stop, breathe, and feel what is happening inside you. Let your emotions surface. Observe them without judgment. Then choose consciously to sustain that frequency aligned with love, trust, and gratitude. Each time your mind is pulled by fear or doubt, return to presence and remember that you are the original consciousness, not the passing thought. Gradually, this practice becomes natural. You will notice immediate external reflections. Your encounters will shift, synchronicities will increase, doors will open. It will be living proof that the universe does not happen to you but responds to you. Reality, therefore, is not a sentence carved in stone, but a dynamic and participatory process. Helena Blavatsky unveiled this mystery through occultism. John Wheeler glimpsed it through science. Whichever path, the core is the same. We exist in a living field where consciousness and manifestation interweave, and discovering this fact is remembering that we are not the role we play, but the essence that sustains the stage, the scenery, and all the characters. When we align with this essence, we transcend fear, expand love, and actively participate in creating a more harmonious world within and without. If you are still here, comment 100%. Thus, there is nothing left but to invite you to experience these truths for yourself. The video may inspire, but the experience is non-transferable. Every time you quiet your restless mind, listen to the heart's whisper and see in practice how the universe responds. You will confirm the wisdom of Blavatsky and Wheeler. Above all, you will confirm the wisdom that already dwells within you, waiting only for the moment to be recognized. And that moment is now.